Y'all went into Grenada for 40, 100, 70, not 500 medical students. And here there are thousands of blacks being persecuted, killed, death squads, and you're not doing anything. Clearly, Haiti is no more or less in the interest of the United States than Grenada. So what you have, for example, a leading editor of a paper in the Delaware Valley asked their reporters to come down and talk to me and said, why is Biden so concerned about Bosnia and not about Haiti? Is it because blacks are involved in Haiti? Blacks are what are at stake in Haiti, and in Bosnia they are Europeans, whites. There is that notion abroad in the Congress, in the country. It's not substantially different than when Lech Walesa came along and all the polls in the state of Delaware and the United States of America focused, or when Israel is in trouble and the American Jewish community and those who believe strongly in Israel focus. Or you can list throughout our history circumstances where our multi-ethnic community looks to things happening in a constituency that they are from, represent, or feel having a stake in.
Joe Biden. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about Joe Biden and this posture he has on Charlie Rose as if they regularly take a hands-off approach to Haiti. You know, obviously the news, Jovenel Moise killed last night, assassinated by death squads, it appears. It's very unclear now in speculation. You know, we'll get into some of the crazier speculation later. But, you know, in the previous months, there'd been all this talk about death squads in Haiti and the idea that Moise was controlling and directing some of them.
Well, he certainly was.
Absolutely was. And when you get into bed with people like that, what happens when things start turning? But back to Biden saying we have this hands-off approach to Haiti. Not technically true. You know, they're interested in Bosnia, but they're also interested in Haiti. The IMF in 1995, and I should have looked up when exactly. That looked like the 90s. In 1995, forced the nationalization of 9 industries in Haiti. Then the Clinton administration itself pressured Haiti to drop rice and sugar tariffs. This had the effect of forcing agricultural workers into textile factories. Fast forward, you know, a lot of political history to the Obama administration, 2010. The Chelsea Manning cables revealed that the U.S. had the ambassador lean on President Rene Preval to achieve a tax carve-out for a minimum wage law that had just been passed unanimously that wanted to raise the minimum wage from something like 29 cents to 61 cents an hour or thereabouts. And that was on behalf of Haynes and Levi and companies like that. So after those workers had been forced off. And there's another thing where the devastating earthquake in 2010, and in this time since, Haiti has basically, and I'm not sure if this was the case beforehand, but the number one NGOs per capita, they get 51% of their food imported, and it's 50% of people are malnourished. So you look at the impacts of what this is happening. And, you know, Biden was propping up Moise just as Moise, we looked this up beforehand, just as Trump did. And, you know, I mean, this is a bipartisan effort, basically, to support... we're going to stop supporting dictatorship in your country, but what that means, what our democracy is going to be exploitation by our corporations.
And we're going to handpick your leaders, too.
Exactly, yeah.
Like, I want to get back to the history and all of this in a second, but just for folks who aren't familiar, you know, very briefly, what has happened since this morning. So this is still a very fluid situation. There has been a successful assassination attempt against Moise, who was murdered in his house. And we'll get into in a second a little bit of who that may have been. But he was murdered in his house. His wife was also shot. She has now been brought to the United States where she is receiving medical treatment. But just to give folks a little bit of context, since mid-February, there have been massive protests against Moise. because he has refused to abdicate his position as president. And this isn't even a situation, right? Like what we've been seeing in other countries where, oh, he's going to start claiming election fraud or things like that. There's been a refusal to have any form of democracy in the country. Right now, Haiti is a country where the vast majority of democratically elected positions are sitting empty. Moise has waged war against the courts. I believe there's only now 10 sitting senators. The assembly is all but dissolved. And Moise has been cracking down on these protests, basically saying, we want to return to civilian rule. We want to return to democracy. He has cracked down on these, or he did crack down on these with brutal, brutal tactics. In fact, he created an organization, the NIA, which is, basically an organization of thugs that do his bidding. They have incredible police powers of both surveillance and arrest, and also the ability to murder people. And they have legal protection from being, tried for any of their crimes against folks, right? So people have been showing up in protest against the government, and they have been met with brutal, brutal crackdowns. And of course, in this kind of scenario, there's a lot of different factions and people who are trying to fill power vacuums, that come up basically when you have the state trying to assert itself against all other parts of society. So now with Moise dead, the question as to who or what organization will be leading the country is very, very much in flux. It's no help that there was supposed to be a new prime minister stepping up today. So there's going to be a lot of questions about the future of Haiti. And, so this is one of those moments where it's tough to talk too much broadly as things are very much unfolding on the ground. But I wanted to note just a couple of quick threads that people should be paying attention to. One of the big scandals regarding Moise is not only the fact that he has been refusing democracy in the country, but this massive corruption scandal in Haiti. As Matt was noting, the incredible amounts of money that come into the country through NGOs and also through international donations, things of that nature. But most notably, the Petrocaribe scandal. Which I don't know if you're too familiar with this, Matt, but Venezuela, in its attempt to help out the people of Haiti, right, continuing that long tradition of solidarity between anti-imperialist countries, Venezuela provided extremely cheap oil to Haiti, around $4 billion, right, where Haiti was only supposed to pay a very small amount of money up front. And the rest of the money was supposed to be set aside to create projects that would help out the working people in Haiti. The vast majority of that money has been embezzled, and people are asking, where is this money? What is going on here? And that significant scandal has been at the center here. And it's worth noting that, when Venezuela is doing stuff like that, the United States has been illicitly trying to prop up dictators. Biden, throughout all of these protests and throughout all of these scandals, has stood very, very firmly with Moise. It's one of those moments where a lot of people do get confused, because typically when you see an assassination, you want to point your fingers directly at the United States. I wouldn't even go as far as to say that there might not be an American role in this, by the way. But it is important to remember that Moise is somebody who was very much propped up and protected by the Biden administration and by the U.S. government. Remember, before this, Martelly, who was the president, was also propped up by Hillary Clinton and the OAS, right? So the United States plays an extremely active role in Haiti. And there's lots of reasons for it. One, the United States wants to exert its hegemony in the Caribbean. Two, Haiti is a very, very dangerous example of a country that has a radically different trajectory. Haiti is where all of the ideas of the Enlightenment and all of European philosophy came into direct contradiction with the realities of imperialism and capitalism. Haiti, for folks who aren't familiar, and I hope most people listening to this are, was the first successful mass slave revolt. People should definitely read the great book, and it should be said time and time again, by C.L.R. James, Black Jacobins, which really asserts this critical moment, not just in North American history, but in human global history that was represented by the Haitian Revolution. So Haiti is a very dangerous like idea to the United States. But most notably, as Matt was mentioning earlier, it's labor. Is having access to extremely cheap labor that is critical to American corporations and to the American imperial project in the region, which is why anytime any kind of left-wing government has approached power in Haiti, it has been met with brutal American crackdowns, including assassinations. So what we're seeing right now is a very clear demand from the Haitian people for democracy. And people are taking it into their own hands quite literally. In many parts of the country, people are self-organizing and trying to organize their communities and their streets to basically face what looks like a potential state failure. The threat here that we have to be watching out for is power vacuum and the United States entrance as the kingmaker, right? That is the biggest threat and the biggest fear right now is the Biden administration comes in and says, here's a rocky situation. The United States is going to come in with the military and take control of this situation. And then they're going to pick the next leader and continue this vicious cycle.
Right.
And just last thing, just so I remember everything from my notes, people should definitely check out the work of Kim Ives at Haiti Liberté. He was a guest on TMBS a few times. Did I give this to you, Matt? It's fine if not. He, in his most recent piece, which came up today, which is about some of the horrible massacres that we've been seeing in Haiti over the past week, where 32 people were murdered at a demonstration. Kim Ives said at the beginning of this piece, because it came out right as this news was breaking, that he believes in the feeling is for most people there that the professional nature of this hit against Moise and the knowledge that they had to have to take out this attack suggests that, one, they had an inside accomplice, and also the scale and sophistication of the operation suggests that it was a well-financed and well-planned operation and not a spontaneous one, which is really important for people to understand in light of the fact that there have been massive street protests for so long in the country, that this is something that was funded and planned out. And, the questions as to who or what organizations are behind it are very much in flux, but people should have that knowledge in their heads, going forward.